Welcome back to another episode of the Frustrated CEO podcast. My name is Patrick Lyons. I'm one of your three co-hosts. I'm glad to welcome back my colleagues and friends. First and foremost, Patsy Feeman. Patsy, welcome back to you.
Thank you. Looking forward to today's podcast.
Yeah, glad to have you. And of course, our third partner in crime, Leb Tannenbaum. Leb, welcome. How are you, sir?
Thank you. I am good, and I am excited to have this podcast roll.
Yeah, me too. And I'm certain this is going to be a great episode for you, the listener, as well, because today it is our extreme honor to welcome Pleasure Allen to the podcast. Now, from a personal standpoint, Pleasure and her family are residents of the West Des Moines, Iowa community. In her professional life, Pleasure is an HR executive with over 15 years of responsible and progressive experience in HR management as well as operations management. Pleasure's professional experience includes executive level management, strategic program management, training and employee development, resource and budget forecasting, organizational development, and employee relations. Now, where I met Pleasure is in her current role of Vice President of HR for the nation's largest independent distributor of life and health insurance products. Pleasure has a bachelor's degree in business management, a master's in leadership, and is pursuing her doctorate degree in organizational leadership. She's also the chief executive consultant and owner of Allen Consulting. Pleasure Allen, welcome to the Frustrated CEO podcast.
Thank you so much, Patrick. It's nice to be here with you, Leb and Patsy.
Yeah. So today we're going to dive into, we're going to try to have, I think what I've been calling an uncomfortable conversation about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So Pleasure, just right out of the gate, I'm curious, do you think, are women and minorities judged more harshly in the workplace?
Patrick, what a great question. And my personal perspective is yes, I do believe that women and minorities are judged more harshly in the workplace. I think from a woman's perspective, right, we are breaking or kicking the glass ceiling of this perception that we can't have it all, right? Women can be mothers and can have very progressive careers. And so typically, the consideration of the mother or the woman is not ever thought about when we schedule meetings, when we have trips, when there's travel. From a minority perspective, as an African-American woman, I find myself wanting to adjust my tone or my frustration so that the perception isn't that I'm an angry Black woman, but that, I'm a professional. And we see that differently, Patrick, if we were to look at the white male, right? Someone might say if they operate or respond the same way that I do, that they're passionate, or that, that's just their approach. But if I were to do that as a woman and a minority, then I'm aggressive or not sensitive. And from a minority perspective, then I get the stereotype that, Black women are demanding or overbearing. So I would say short answer, yes.
Yeah, and it actually brings to mind something that I heard years ago. Clearly, as a white man, I haven't experienced that. I remember reading and hearing, and then starting to try to pay more attention to it and see it, that historically in our traditional patriarchy, white male driven businesses, advancement for women, minorities, people of color really meant more conformity than authenticity or celebration of diversity or their skills. It's how much could they conform and fit into what I think a leader looks like. And I'm forming that belief from the perspective of a white man.
Sure, I absolutely agree, Patrick, with that perspective. I think from a minority perspective or from a woman's perspective, you do have to work harder. You do have to conform, right? I recall a time in my career where I had a leader say, "What does professional leadership look like?" And the description was more common to what the dynamic or what the culture looked like there. And so as an African-American, one of the only in the leadership at that time, it was clear to me that my culture, my hairstyle, the way that I carried myself, the things that make me unique weren't well received. And the counsel given at that time was to conform. Cut your hair. It should be a certain color. This is how we dress. Where's your suit jacket? Where's your appropriate level heel? And those are the things that were important to that culture. And so unless I could conform to that, I think there are folks arrested in their career if they're not able to adjust. And I don't think that's just women. I think that's just in general. There's a culture, right? Patrick, you and I have had the joke of good luck going to Burger King with the McDonald's uniform on, right? Everyone has a culture and a uniform or a model that they want to look like. I think when we talk about diversity and inclusion, how can you change what is an innate part of you, right? How can you change what makes you unique? And that was an example of how can you conform? How can you talk different? How can you look different?
Mm.
I don't know exactly how to approach this, but I'll just throw it out there and see if it sticks or not. So I have been a member for 34 years in a primarily African-American gospel church.
Yes.
And the leadership of that church is African-American.
Mm-hmm.
And the pastor is one of the longest serving pastors in Portland.
Mm-hmm.
And conformity seemed to matter quite a bit to him. So, I'm listening to this. I totally, understand and agree with what you're saying, but I'm also seeing it as colorless in some ways, because he set a standard and he expected a lot from the worship pastor, the children's pastor, the associate pastor, to conform to his vision, I think, and to the culture of how he saw this church. And it was a very large, successful kind of, wonderful. I mean, I stayed there 34 years. But I am interested in how you see it if in terms of kind of this original question around conformity and being women and minorities being judged. Because I found at times that as I got closer to the leadership, which I kind of shied away from, especially as a consultant,
Mm-hmm.
I started seeing some things that just probably wouldn't fly in the business world.
So, Lev, I think I want to unpack that in a couple sections, if that's okay. So,
Very
one,
Mm-hmm.
I don't disagree with you at all. I think there is probably in cultures and different environments a level of conformity, and it's expected, right? And so it's kind of like when you're in Rome, you do what the Romans do, right? When you come to my house, you eat the way that we eat. And so I think that's a little bit of what you're describing in the culture of a Baptist structure, that there is a way in their doctrine and their approach to ministry and the way that they want to worship. They're saying, if you want to be a part of this experience, we want you to conform. We want the choirs to move this way. We want the music to sound this way. And so absolutely, I think we'll see that. And I think that is inclusive across all cultures, right? If I was to go to an AME church, or if I was to go to, a Lutheran church, you're going to be asked to conform as well. So agree that it's probably colorless in that sense. I think when we talk about the workplace, I think whatever culture is predominant, right? Whatever is considered well received, that's the shadow we would fall in. And so I think that is kind of the descriptor I was giving, that I was a part of an environment that had not a lot of experience with African-American leadership, and they didn't know how to engage with it, Leb, if I'm candid. And so instead of embracing and allowing inclusivity and diversity to show up in an organic way, the response was, you must be like us because us is the better, right? Mm-hmm. And so I don't think that it's right in any format, but I think the difference in worship is you can choose where you want to worship. You can adjust, you can go somewhere else. But when you are selected to lead in an organization and someone is asking you to change what is the core identifier of you, that's challenging.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, absolutely. Although, again, we know how important culture is.
Yes, sir.
right? And you can choose maybe not to accept an offer.
Yes,
If you get what's
can.
happening, it ain't gonna work out.
I love that, Liv. You might have to help my younger self realize that. I don't think I was able to feel confident in that type of decision, right? I felt like, what an honor. I got selected. I'm her. They picked me. And
Yeah.
so a part of me, Lev, didn't have the brevity of courage and knowledge to understand how to do that. Now, that's not me now, but certainly a while ago, Lev, I could have used your counsel.
Well, and I think you're pointing to what I often hear is kind of unconscious bias. You know, we're unaware. I just was working with a leader the other day, and I said, "What kind of environment do you want to work in?" And she's like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, "Well, you can actually design it and choose." And she's like, "Well, what do you mean?" So I think there is a level of both in the culture we create, because we talk about so often cultures that are not design cultures, but by default. But with the whole DEI awareness, we're starting to be more and more aware of what do I want and does this fit me?
Yeah. I love that, Patsy. And you bring up a valid point when you say, you have a choice. I think we are now in a climate, just globally, that is more received than it has been historically, right? There's so much that captures the voice of inclusivity and diversity. I mean, it just depends on which way you swing, this topic, right? Sometimes it's too much, right? Everything isn't because you're Black or because you're a woman. Sometimes it's you weren't qualified. You didn't have what the role required or needed, right? But because now we've created a space, people can do exactly that, Patsy. Choose, speak up, and decide how they want to lean in. And I think that's great. I think it's only going to get stronger, but we also have resistance to that. You have people that are saying we don't want that, and we fall in the shadow of our leaders. And so I have a new leader, as you all know, and his energy and the way that he creates the culture, it welcomes people to be their authentic selves, where that's not always the case in a corporate environment. You have to sometimes fall in the shadow. And so even though we're empowered to choose, in this scenario, Patsy, that I'm describing, this was a woman who was explaining to me, if you want to survive in this culture, you have to have a look, right? So I love that, though, Patsy. You're correct. Unconscious bias, we don't sometimes even realize.
I'm almost wondering maybe if we because we jumped ahead a few, we dove into the topic. Is there value in even just grounding the conversation in what is diversity, what is equity, what is inclusion, what is belonging? First of all, maybe a place to start is there a common accepted definition?
So, Patrick, there may be a common accepted definition. I'll give you my perspective on what those things mean. And I think typically they're relatable, right? So as humans, I think we all have a value proposition. So that's the one thing that I think that centralizes us. Black, orange, green, yellow, right? Whatever ethnicity or backdrop we have, all of us have a value system that we operate by. And I think, in that, you want to feel included. I mean, we can all think about a time when we did not feel included, whether that's a restaurant experience or a meeting experience, or even at the table where someone made a joke and you didn't get the punchline. Who wants to be the only person not laughing? And so I think that's the common maybe definition of diversity, or excuse me, of inclusivity, is we want to be included. And I think everyone has experience, regardless of race, education, any of that, where you didn't feel like you belonged. And so, or that you weren't included. And so then think about that then from the belonging standpoint, where you got the punchline, you got the joke, but you weren't included in it. Like you come to the meeting and you're like, Patsy, what's so funny? And Patsy's like, oh, never mind. Well, you're not included intentionally now, and that's different. And that's where it translates into belonging. Maybe I don't belong here. Maybe they don't like me because of, right? And then diversity is just all the stuff that makes us who we are, right? I think there's diversity layers, right? Diversity of thought, obviously the visual diversity component. And then even as an African American woman, I don't understand what it's like to be the African American woman everywhere. So there's an appreciation of diversity across even ethnicities and races. And so I think, diversity is what makes me unique, the things that I can't change about me, and the things that I value most. When I think about belonging, I want to be able to bring my culture, my style into any environment and feel like I'm welcomed there. And then inclusivity is I'm included even when my position or value system is different.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And then why is it important to a CEO? Why is it important to an organization, I realize that's such a broad question because, right, you can even, you could decide, do I want to answer that? It's important for attracting and retaining talent. It's important for, meeting fitting into a diverse community that we live in. It's, even serving our diverse customers. And maybe I've just answered the question, but from your perspective, what are some of those heavy hitters? Why should somebody listening? It's an obvious question. To me, it's an obvious answer. This is important stuff. Yeah. But if I'm still sitting on the fence, I don't know how that could happen in 2023, but if I'm still sitting on the fence, why do I need this? Why does this matter?
So Patrick, I'm going to be a little bit facetious, and I think you're okay with that. And hopefully Patsy and Lev are comfortable. So obviously, yes, the standard things from a human capital discipline, if we want a culture that's rich in professional contributions, then you need diverse populations to do that. You can't have groupthink. You can't have just one way of getting it done or your business won't grow. I think my smart aleck answer, if I could be so candid, is that minorities are no longer the least educated or don't have money. And so, and money's like air. And so there's choices. Just as Patsy talked about, you can decide the culture. Well, you can decide where you want to spend your money. And if you have a product, or if you have a solution, or whatever it is that your business is, you have to be able to speak to the diversity of your clientele. And race is one way, but also you can't understand someone's preferences or other things that fall within the diversity bucket. And so money. You want to continue to make money, then you need to actually create a space that speaks to the African American and, the different cultures that we have amongst our communities. And I'll be even further. And Patrick, I said to you, African American isn't the race that's growing at rapid pace, right? So when you think about your communities, they don't look the way that they used to. Right. I remember one of my first houses that I purchased, and on that block were doctors and lawyers, and there weren't a lot that looked like me. And I remember an owner saying, "Who the heck are you? And what do you do?" And Lev, I couldn't believe it. He thought I was the housekeeper when he came over to welcome us. And he says, "I'm looking for the owner." Oof. And I looked around and said, "Well, you found her." And his first question was, "Well, what do you do to earn money?" So I think that is why it's important. I love Patsy. I love Patsy's expression on that. Like, oh my gosh, let me talk to him. But I think that's a real scenario that has shifted. African Americans are entrepreneurs. They're highly educated. They're using their talents and their gifts, and they're choosing where to spend their money. So as a CEO, I need to make sure that I am not only speaking to the population that I'm most comfortable with, but all, because the communities that you serve are changing, and it does impact your bottom line.
Yeah. What I love about that answer, again, I said, it's 2023. You would hope that even just from whether it's moving from an ethical place, just accepting it's the right thing to do.
For sure.
You would hope that would be the motivation. But if that's not my motivation, you touched on it. I just read this the other day, and it was on the topic of Gen Z and young millennials. Yes. Are more willing. They are statistically more willing to purchase sustainable products and services than name brands. They're willing to spend up to 10% more for a sustainable product than they are for a name brand. And the point of it was they have access to the information. They have more information at their fingertips than any generation has ever had.
Absolutely.
They're smarter. They've created these subcultures that, they've got through TikTok and through Instagram. They're communicating with each other.
Yes.
So there's when they find a company that they are either fully behind or fully, I don't want to say fully against, but they're struggling to get behind, they're sharing that information. And they are, I also, that generation makes up now the largest portion of the workforce. So it's customers, it's potential employees. It's, I'd say ignore DEI and belonging at your own risk at this point.
That's right, Patrick. And I think the other critical component is the CEO doesn't want the press. I mean, you just don't. There is no, you're not safe anymore, right? You used to be able to say things behind the curtain, and it's like it was just between Patsy and Leb. Nobody knows. Nope. People are recording. People are videoing. People, to your point of sharing, and so you're in the press, and unfortunately, the recovery is not as generous as it has been historically. People want you to, and Patsy's laughing, but you just don't want the press, right? You don't, and I hate to use this to be as candid, but you don't want to be coined as not equitable in your practices. You don't want to be coined as, not having diversity within your leadership structure. And so I think those are all things that a lot of CEOs are trying to check that box because they don't want that. And a lot of businesses and partners are also requiring that, right? They want to understand your footprint around diversity from a business perspective. And so you're going to see more of it increase anyway, because it's a part of doing business now for some entities.
Yeah, great.
So I want to go back to when you moved into that neighborhood.
Sure.
Because I think part of the challenge is, and you're in HR, and organizational development, so we can bring it into the workplace. But that question could have actually been very authentic, depending on the attitude in which it was asked.
Absolutely.
Right? So, what's some of your guidance? I mean, when someone comes in and they're way different than you, and there's all these categories, and you awkwardly don't know exactly how to interact with that person. You don't know what jokes you can tell. You don't know what stories you can tell. And you want to stay out of the press. But how do we learn to form high performance teams, to create a great unified culture when we don't have all the information that we need to actually interact with each other in such a way that it is acceptable, it is joyful, it is authentic? We have to, how do we learn, or are there courses missing in business that we just haven't even invented yet?
So, Lev, I think that's a great question. And I love that you actually went back to that example, because the individual, I could say his name is Adam, and he's a good friend of mine today. And I think a big part of what you just described is probably a lot of the challenge, right? I do think, and Patrick and I have talked about this, I do think there are folks that are just absolutely naive to, diversity and different backgrounds and history. And so one thing that Patrick shared earlier, like, there shouldn't be an excuse for it, right? Google is such a great tool. But if you can't Google, I think we should show a little vulnerability. Right. I don't know what I don't know about diversity, your experience, your backdrop. And so a lot of times we are asking questions or responding based on whatever has influenced, our understanding around that. And typically our understanding is misinformed, because we all know we can't believe what we see in the news. We all can't believe what's on social media. And my goodness, sometimes even what was a really reliable source historically might be questionable when we think about the newspaper and certain, reporting. So I think the reality is We have to show some vulnerability, Leb, and ask, be curious, right? And Patrick and I have had a moment where it was authentic and it was genuine and it was kind, and he was able to ask questions and I was able to ask questions because we were comfortable with saying, hey, I don't even know how to even approach this. Any ideas? Or, hey, Pleasure, I have heard things about your culture in this way. Can you educate me? And so I don't think I don't think anyone is opposed to authentic questions. My neighbor truly was naive because he said to me, I grew up in a small town and everybody that was on my block, I knew. I didn't have a lot of exposure to people of color at all. And when I did, they happened to be in services of hospitality. So I've seen you laying sod and planting stuff, and I just assumed you were, because how do you afford this house? I've not met a person, right? So his question was pure, but thank goodness for my husband, who is incredible. And he opened the door, because my response, Patsy, was get the heck out of here, shut the door, right? But my husband opened the door to say, how are you? My name is Jason, and we're the new owners across the street. And so I think that is the naive person. Where it's tricky, Leb, is we do have people that actually know what they're doing. They make
Sure.
jokes that are hurtful or say things that they know hit below the belt, and they perpetuate a space that we don't want to be in. And then they pretend to be naive. Oh, I didn't know that was offensive. Yes, you did. And so I think a part of that is we have to find the ability to speak up where it's not confrontational. And I think that's why a lot of companies are trying to do the education around what is diversity, how do you speak up around it, because we do have perpetuators of this type of conduct and behavior in our environments, right? It's an example of a compliment, and Patrick and I talked about it. Oh my gosh, Pleasure, you're so well spoken. Well, on one hand, that's a compliment, I get it. But why wouldn't I be if I'm an executive at a Fortune whatever type company?
Mm-hmm.
We should be well spoken, and those aren't compliments, Leb, that you would get.
Right.
You wouldn't get that as a compliment. But when
Right.
you think of different races, it's like, oh, she's so well spoken, or oh, I can walk in the building and they're like, oh my God, your outfit is so nice. Well, I'm dressed the same way that Patsy's dressed, but nobody stopped Patsy at all. So I think there are those times where we perpetuate behaviors and we have to address it. So if you're naive, stay curious, ask questions. If you're a perpetuator, then we have to be advocates in cultures and say that that's not what we want and that won't be tolerated, and call it out to say, Patrick, I heard you say this today. Tell me more about what you mean.
Yeah.
It forces the individual to address what they know they're doing.
Yeah, that's very powerful. You reminded me, I'm going all the way back to when I was 10. So I'm 10 years old, and I grew up in East Orange, New Jersey, in an entirely African-American neighborhood. And that's how I grew up.
Yes, sir.
And then my parents moved us to the suburbs. And there was one African-American person when I went to high school. That's just as an example. So it was really, really different. But I'm 10 years old. I never heard the words that I learned within a month of being there. I didn't know what a kike was. I didn't know what a wop was. I didn't know what a chink was. I mean, I was blown away.
Yeah.
And, I think this is true in business as well. You do have a choice to not participate.
Yeah, you do. You do.
You have a choice to not participate or call out and say, no, that's not for me.
Yeah. And that's the education, Leb. You said, are we missing something? I think that's the education that the businesses need. How do I speak up and it doesn't become explosive? How do I help a person understand that this is how you treat me? We have to teach people, Leb, and that's just business. So business 101, right? You go into Starbucks, and Starbucks is known for their big cut. Hey, welcome in, Patsy. How are you? Have a great day. I mean, it's like this is an experience. And so we've become accustomed to how Starbucks treats us, how customer service is. And so we have to do that in the business. I have to teach people how to treat me as an executive, as a woman executive, that happens to be a minority, I have to be able to speak back to my leaders and say, what does that comment mean? I'm not certain about that. I'm available this evening, even though I am the mother. Or, no, I'd like to travel on that trip as well, even though I'm the only woman. These are the types of things that we have to be able to speak up against. Or how about that joke that Pleasure made the other day and it wasn't funny? So then don't laugh. And being really comfortable with not doing that in a space. And so that to me is where we need to start educating. How do I speak up without creating confrontation, but also helping to teach people how to treat me and communicate with me? And that's any diversity, right? Any diversity.
So, Pleasure, what do you do when someone comes to you because of the leadership role that you have, and they authentically feel they're not included, or they have no chance for career path promotion? Let's talk about that, because we know that keeps CEOs. They can't cover everything, right? They're counting on people on their leadership team.
That's right.
Right. And they may not know how that person feels, or that maybe there's a manager or someone at a director level who's behaving differently than he or she would expect, or other managers, directors would expect. And and most companies do have core values that they're trying to align behavior with, but maybe there's something a frustrated CEO would want to hear from you about. How does that work when someone comes to you?
Yeah. So it's a great question, Lev. And I got into the discipline of human resources because I wanted to be able to help the person just like that. Right. So that's exactly why I got into it. And one thing is, regardless of the core values of a company and any infrastructure that I'm in, I just love people. So the first thing I think that I do is to see them right where they are as a person. And I think that's critical to the safety that human resources is supposed to offer in the first place. So I've had people that come in that have a different perspective. I'll give a really great example that's confrontational, but I had an individual that came to me and he said, I'm not certain if you're going to do anything about this, Pleasure, because I have a complaint on a Black woman who's wearing a Black Lives Matters t-shirt. Right? Now, our policy is no politics, right? So the first thing I had to create for him, because he felt like, and I happened to be the person he was concerned about, that if he came to me as a leader, he's not being included, he's not being considered, his perspective, his feelings, and he's concerned. Because to your point, Lev, those core values are on the wall, and it says that we believe that he should be heard. But he hadn't come to me because he thought, well, you're Black, and I'm certain you're going to say Black Lives Matters, right? So I'm not coming to you. Well, someone in his team said, go talk to her. She wants to hear from you, even if it's a hard message. So the first thing that I think we have to create is safety. And that should be developed, and it should be a light switch for leaders. You have to create safety for your teams. Even if you don't like what they're going to share, you have to see them. And so someone coming to my office, the first thing I did, I saw him and I listened, and not listen to respond, but listen to really hear his perspective. What are you feeling? Because that's what I believe we cannot change. You cannot change how a person feels about something. I don't care what words you use. I don't care how fancy you are. How you leave them feeling is critical. And that's the space you need to be in to change behaviors. And so I ask a lot of accountable questions, Lev, to anyone that comes to my office about concerns. Show me what it looks like. Tell me what it looks like. Help me understand the experience so that I have a full perspective on what they're really sharing. I think the other component is I don't try to solution before I have all of the facts. Leaders need to inspect, get into the environment, spend time in those spaces. And so, as a person comes to me and they're like, I don't really appreciate Patsy's approach and her style, well, I'm going to go and spend some time in Patsy's area to learn Patsy's style, sometimes when we don't understand what makes a person tick or different communication styles, we immediately jump to the dark side, and it's because they don't like women, or it's because they don't like people with blue eyes, versus, is there something I'm missing? So see and hear the person is critical, create that safety, inspect, and make sure that you know what's happening in your environment. Just like parents know their children, leaders know their leaders, right? And so if at the C-suite, my leader, Mark, and my other leader, John, they know their executive team. They're not surprised about certain things that they're hearing. And so inspect and model the behavior that's appropriate. Obviously, we want to continue to offer coaching and support. We need to create an environment where coaching is good, not bad, right? Meetings with Patrick are awesome, not scary. We should really see coaching as a gift, and that if a company's investing in that, it's for your growth and your learning and your development. Once employees trust you, Leb, and I don't care what level they're at, their ability to learn and hear you is transformational. So back to that t-shirt example, I cared for it and all individuals were happy. The individual went to the individual that was concerned, and she said, I apologize. I was out of dress code today, and I don't want us to have discourse in our team. But that happened in discovery. Discovery can only happen with trust. I couldn't go to her and say, oh my gosh, you're out of policy. I had to also create safety for her. I had to help her understand that the behavior you're displaying doesn't not represent the culture that you want, and it doesn't create the perspective you're trying to share. There's other ways to do that where you can have engagement. And so create a space where people can get engaged and that they think it's their idea. It's exploring. Once that light comes on, and the individual's name was Mike, and he came to me later and he said, I had no idea how great you were. And he wanted to thank me. And until I left the structure, I think he came by my office. He had a garden, and he started to bring me, Leb, some of his gardening, which I kind of miss if I'm candid. But he would bring me vegetables and other things. But right there, I changed his experience with an African American, his perception around what I thought Black Lives Matters meant. And he wasn't confused about the position I held in the company. I am a company woman. Until I can't do what the values of a company suggests, then why work there? So I'm here to do a job. And he became confident after that safety that regardless, Pleasure will do her job. Even if she doesn't agree with the approach, she will do what's right.
That's great.
Awesome. Pleasure. You brought up core values.
Yes.
And here we are, episode 45. I cannot believe we've made it this far. But it seems like in episode after episode, we keep coming back to the importance of core values, of a business sticking to their core values, going back to their core values. It doesn't matter what the topic of an episode has been. We always come back to, and so many of our guests have said, we look at that through the lens of our core values. But it almost feels like diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, it sometimes feels like a value in and of itself. Should it be a stated core value? So if my company has 5 to 7 core values, should DEI and belonging be a stated core value? And I don't mean like, we have our 5 to 7 core values. And oh, by the way, we also really value diversity, equity, and belonging.
Yeah.
Should it, does it need to be one of the values on the wall and one of the values that's stated in the handbook? Is that what we need to actually make the inroads, or is that overcomplicating it?
So I think it's tricky, Patrick. I think there's a couple things. So for the frustrated CEO, I think you have to really look at your culture. When you have really great cultures that are just phenomenal at inclusivity and diversity and celebration of belonging, it's like the values write themselves, right? You can feel it when you walk in the door, from the receptionist to the artwork to, the people that might be our services team helping to manage the, cleaning. I mean, those are all things. And trust me, people can see it and feel it when you walk into a space. For those that are working to evolve their culture, if it's important to you, it should be in your core value. It should be stated very clearly that this is what we believe. And historically, if our brand or our business or our culture hasn't represented it, I think it's important to highlight that we do. If you're looking to attract, and Patrick, you hit on this earlier, this newer generation, they're looking for it. New employees are reading your handbook. They know the handbooks better than we do. They want to know, what does it say about LGBTQ? What does it say about preferences? What does it say about safety for me? How can I be a part of a resource group or a social group? And so there's a part of me that says you have to be able to speak to what it means to you versus the other, additive kind of addendum. We believe in these 5 things. And of course, then you won't have success. When something matters and it's attached to your core values, typically your core values are attached to your competency behaviors, and that attaches in most places to your money. Back to that money. If it's important for us to change, then one way to guarantee that, at least while you're operating under your organization's domain, the moment you get on the parking lot, you're going to start aligning yourself to what that company believes versus what does pleasure believe. I think the only way to do that is to make it a core principle, core value of your structure.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You bet.
Pleasure. Speaking of money, go ahead, Patsy.
Well, I've just obviously where you work is a more evolved and kind of inclusive culture on a variety of, living your core values is in addition to having them on the wall.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of CEOs out there who are in the question of, how do I evolve my organization around to be more inclusive? Yeah. Certainly you can set metrics for the D and the E, but the inclusivity is like building a culture. It's an evolution. It's I think we were talking before we got on this call, it's messy, it's evolving. So, what are some recommendations you might have for CEOs that are more in the discovery and evolving phase?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Patsy. So I think for CEOs that are really trying to evolve in this, first identify very clearly, what space are you not evolved in, right? And so I think the evolution started with, so we are diverse, right? It started as diversity. You have some companies that moved completely away from diversity and moved just to inclusion, right? And you have just a few now that are tagging on the phrase of belonging. And so I think CEOs should be really transparent and understand, what is it that we want our culture to be? And I think there are some environments, Patsy, if I'm candid, that they won't ever evolve there because they're comfortable with their business and their business, revenues and their clientele, that they don't need to. And so maybe their level of evolution is, all are welcome, but we're going to hire this type of person because that's what we want. Right. And so I want to acknowledge that we do, and we will always have companies and businesses like that. I don't think societal wise, we will graduate to that. For the leader that's really interested in creating an evolved culture, then you have to engage diverse populations and people that think differently than you in order to even know where to start. And you have to actually lead the way. So I would say CEOs should talk about it, not at the surface level that we believe in it and we've got to do better, but talk about the transformation in their thought process. When you believe it, you behave that way, you act it out, you live it, right? I am an avid Starbucks drink, and I bleed the brand of Starbucks, Patsy. I have it in my hand all the time. I believe in it. I can tell you about the different, coffees and the flavors and the sizes. Leb, it is crazy. I can even tell you the prices. I'm a believer, not just a fan. See how different that is? Mm-hmm. When CEOs become believers and truly believers of this, not just a fan when it's popular, not just in the stands cheering because it's what's hot topic, then they can start transforming their culture. And so they have to first acknowledge that and lead and model. And then I would say start gathering people around you that can help you build those programs. And you need to have people that are inclusive. So just because you're Black doesn't mean you're inclusive. Just because you're white doesn't mean you're inclusive. Just because you're Asian. So any ethnicity that I've missed, right? We need to have people that are well-rounded and educated to really support the message of inclusivity. Just because I'm an African American doesn't mean that, you're not welcome to join the social group for Blacks. I need you as a part of that to help with advocacy as well. So you need to make sure you have the right advocates.
Mhm. Mhm.
We had a guest on a couple of episodes ago that was talking about reverse mentoring.
Yeah.
And actually, interviewing, the diverse ages and other aspects of the organization to find out what do they think. And I thought that was really brilliant.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. And this generation, again, is more informed and the cultures are more mixed than they've ever been. And so I think about my 17-year-old son who would say to you, why is this even an issue?
Yeah.
Right. And so you might have those folks in those cultures, but I think you want them to be willing to talk about, who do we want to be? What is the structure that we want to have? And CEOs have to really set the tone for that and model it.
Mm-hmm. When you're talking about Starbucks, you reminded me of something that I think maybe we could put as a let's get practical. I was in a Starbucks in New York City, and it was busy and it was early.
Yes.
And someone came in, and the barista was doing what they do, and this person came in and placed the order and followed that with when they were, I guess, done communicating, "Thank you, sir." And that person was furious that that person was referred to as sir, and blew up, and everybody stopped in the whole Starbucks. And what I think, I gleaned from that is, allow for honest mistakes.
Sure.
You give some grace in all of this.
Yeah.
It's not because the person meant no offense whatsoever and apologized. At least I heard at least 10 apologies that weren't accepted.
Yeah.
How does that
Yeah.
reflect your role in business? Do you talk about grace? Do you recognize people are going to make honest mistakes from time to time?
Absolutely, Leb. So one, like that's not an awesome Starbucks experience. Like that's terrible. And I hate to hear that. And absolutely from a business perspective, I think you all have heard it, right? Where we're telling our leaders and staff and in all education, right? Whether it's diversity education or just basic communications in general, assume the best, right? Give people the benefit of the doubt, give them a break. I will say, Leb, that there's been such a silence around the feeling of the person that has to operate in a space that doesn't feel like they belong, that sometimes that explosion and that blow up is because it's been unsupported. It's been unaddressed, right? I mean, it's kind of like you got a prick on your finger and not a big deal. You can get a Band-Aid later. You can kind of keep working. When your arm is cut off, you're going to put immediate attention there, right? Because you're going to die. And so I think there are populations of culture and different ethnicity groups and LGBTQ and others that feel like they've not been heard for such a long time that you're seeing a bit of explosive behavior because they're trying to send a message like enough is enough. Understand that you should ask my preference, or you misunderstood. I'm more masculine and I look like a male, but I'm a female, right? And so I do agree that we absolutely need to have grace and we should expect that from others and show it for others. But I think that's a little bit of what we're seeing, Leb, in the climate where people are saying, I don't know how else to get your attention. So they're in this place of explosion. And then I don't think things like the pandemic and other things that we faced in the last few years have helped to just deal with mental capacity and wellness. And so I'm certain that person went home feeling justified, like, you should know better. When in reality, kind of back to what we talked about, we do have to help and teach people how to treat us. And so what's the technique to do that in the work environment? Hey, Leb, I know you didn't mean to hurt me today, but when you said ABC, it really hurt me to my core. And I want to tell you that I don't appreciate that, right? So we've got to create a space where people can tell. And here's the receptiveness. Leb, you have to be open to saying that wasn't my intent, Pleasure, and I'd like a chance for us to rebuild. The moment that that can happen in a work environment, people want that. We don't intentionally not want harmony, but sometimes this big loud voice comes into the workplace or into the customer experience because we're suffering. Populations feel like they're suffering and nobody hears their suffering. And so in order for that to be heard, everybody in Starbucks heard that. Some were embarrassed, some climbed under their table. You were observing, Leb, to say, oh man, what happened here for the sake of education? But that's the courage that you had. But I think there's a little mix of that. So hopefully that helps to address a little bit of what you were aiming for there.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. I think that's right on the money and easier said than done, unfortunately, especially in the moment. And if someone feels backed up about certain things that have been happening over a period of time. I have one more question when we started to talk about money and equity. So being a basketball fan and being a sports fan in general, it's clear that women don't get paid what men get paid, and they play the same sport and they play at a really high level, right? And it's been brought up with the WNBA and it's been brought up in professional soccer. And Portland has got a women's soccer team that has got a rabid fan base, and it's being brought up. Have you seen that in the workplace in terms of having to determine pay scales for positions and titles? And because we started out with, our women and minorities judged more harshly in the workplace, and that to some degree would fit into that category around equity and pay.
Absolutely. So Leb, when you're speaking on this, it kind of reminds me, and Patsy mentioned it early on, about unconscious bias, right? And so this is a space that I'm guilty in when I think about, unconscious bias, that you, as a leader in the human capital discipline, right, we're looking at compensation all the time, right? I grew up in a home where my mother was a caretaker and my father was the provider. And so those things that we experience also just automatically trigger how you are maybe processing and placing people. So there was an audit done and I had to look at, wow, Pleasure, you placed all the females here and the males here. So sometimes, so short answer, yes, we're seeing it in our business. I think we have to even train and change how we define leadership. And that is different even in our homes. Right. And that is different in the workplace. We make an assumption, or at least I was making an assumption, that the man's the provider and the woman is not. So I need to care for the man as he cares for the family. And as a woman, we even do that. And so we need to have practices and things in place that really speak to what are the core responsibilities of the job and price it based on the job. I've seen a lot of companies, Lev, and the company that I'm at is not doing it today, but we've done it in previous worlds that I've worked in, where the recruiter would remove anything that would support, gender specifics, even race, even as far as removing the name. Here's the two candidates, here's the qualifications and the skills, and do assessments outside of that. And then here's the candidate, here's what we would offer a person with this skill set. And then of course, obviously there's portions where we would introduce and then, price that role and make an offer. But I think that is a technique that organizations are taking to make sure that they are not using their own bias or perspective. It's not influencing. And for me to be in the type of seat that I'm in and to acknowledge that I've done that and that I'm guilty of that speaks to how easy it is for us to fall into the history of what makes us who we are, how we grew up, what we think. I say, yes, sir, Leb, just because that's how my mama and daddy raised me, not because I view myself less than. I am constantly saying that. And it isn't about position. You could be the cafeteria leader or the janitor. I will still say yes, sir, and yes, ma'am, especially if I recognize It's a term of respect. So I think with that, we probably have to have protocols and techniques in place that help to support us so that we are intentional about increasing that ceiling for women and for minorities. I think the other component of that is you're seeing women also on the reverse. When was the last time you saw a team and they're all women? And they're hiring that way. They're telling recruiters that they want that. No different than minorities, right? I'm hiring in talent acquisition. I want a diverse candidate, visual diversity. So some companies are also going to a compliance metric to say, did I even have a diverse pool? And that's a big transition, Lev. We didn't have a pool before. And I've heard people say, well, I don't know where to find them. Never say that, CEO. That is ridiculous. Get that out of your lexicon, right? There are people that specialize in making sure that we can see diverse candidates and minorities or women or whatever it is that you're looking for. So I would recommend that the frustrated CEO get real honest about your practice, change up your interviewing protocols, put in metrics that you can truly measure, and you have to have a higher level of sign-off. So in one company, if you didn't have a diverse slate, then you had to reopen the job and get a diverse slate. So I think that puts pressure on the recruiters to meet their metrics, because time to fill is attached to money, right? It's attached again to those results. So I think we do have to be mindful of it. We don't want to go too far the other way, Lev, so I would caution us. We have talented men. We have talented white men. We love white men. We love black men. We love everyone. We don't want people to not feel included. And so I would say at the end of the day, you should always hire who is most capable and qualified for the role. But if you're looking for something specific, then you might have to pay to really find that and be intentional.
Yeah, that's really good.
Love that. You answered one of my questions, and that was, how do you find diverse candidates? And I'm cheating because this is part of the conversation you and I had before we brought you on.
He's a cheater, fans. He's a cheater.
I am. I mean, I'm all smoke and mirrors. No, but here's the thing. Who do CEOs typically go to when they're looking to fill positions, right? They go to their trusted, long-standing relationships with their external recruiters, many of whom are white, right? And they have their networks, they have their pools of people that they very often move around from company to company to company. And so if that's where you're going and you're asking them to find me some diverse candidates and it's not within their pool, then it may lead you to that false conclusion that we just don't know where to find them. They're just not out there. So it's a fantastic point. Look elsewhere, right? Call a different recruiter. Somebody specializes in this. And to your point, it's not about hiring minority over non-minority. It's how do we get a lot of really great people into the pool and just increase our odds that by hiring the best person, we're also at the same time going to become more diverse.
That's right.
More inclusive. So
that's right.
Great stuff. Okay, we are getting close. I feel like we could do a whole nother hour, and maybe we may Pleasure. We may just end up inviting you to come on for another episode to continue to talk about this, because I almost feel like, okay, so if a listener, if a frustrated CEO is hearing this and saying, okay, I want to improve in this area. I want to get better at diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in my organization. I feel like we could do a whole episode on just what are the practical steps? What are the how would you do that if you were going to lay out a plan for an organization? Maybe that'll, we may just have to do that. Otherwise, go a whole nother hour, which I don't know anybody wants to do. So maybe in lieu of that right now, I look to my colleagues. Any other questions that you have before we round, as using the sports analogy, round third and head into home with a let's get practical?
I do have one.
Okay.
We were talking about evolving our organizations to be more inclusive. And Pleasure, so much of what you've talked about is involving our own humanity.
Yes.
As human beings to be more inclusive.
Yes.
Because that's where, if I'm not doing that for the person sitting in my seat, then
Yeah.
I can't bring grace. I can't create safety or trust. So this would be part of that second or third episode, Patrick. But if you could give us just a highlight response to that, because I think it is about that.
Yeah, no, I love that, Patsy, and could not agree with you more, right? I think as humans, we are programmed to do what we've seen or what we've heard, and that's not bad, right? I mean, the first woman that taught me everything I know was my mother, and I think she was and is incredible. But I recognize that there were things that she taught me that weren't right, right? And so when we think about inclusivity and diversity, you have to have the courage to confront the you, right? And it starts with you.
Yes.
And it takes courage to do that. And that takes humility to even acknowledge that you have a gap. You know, we're in a society now, Patsy and team here, that we want perfection. And people don't want to be coined narcissistic or, you know, not capable or any of those things. And so in the evolution of diversity and inclusion, I agree it starts with you. And you have to be able to challenge all of the things that you think you were taught that were right. And you have to then establish the value proposition that gives you the most peace, that gives you the most, you know, hope and happiness. And when you think about hate and not being inclusive and trying to keep people from belonging or not appreciating diversity, that actually is harder to me to do than just showing love and care and consideration and thoughtfulness, because it feels so rewarding when I can say, man, I heard that that group of people were this way, but it's so rewarding and refreshing when I can just for a moment say, won't I give it a shot? Won't I challenge my own perceptions and my own bias and my own history and really see, you know, cultures and people for who they are, which is the Adam friendship that I have today. One of my best friends, I trust him with my kids. In fact, we have dinner and he sold his house. We sold our houses together and are still neighbors. But it took his family and my family being willing to challenge what we believed was our truth and realize that there was a bunch of bull hockey, Patsy, and all wrong. And as a result, love is so powerful and grace is so necessary. And we are perpetual students in learning from our experiences. And while my mother is still amazing, I'm teaching her at her tender age that this is not the right way, mommy. We can do it different. And of course, I show her by what I model.
Yeah.
Because she's
That's
still my mother.
wonderful.
Yes, ma'am. But she understands and she knows I'm unapologetically that. And that is how CEOs have to lead in power unapologetically in the right way.
Thank you.
You bet.
I'm glad I asked that question.
Liv, any other questions from you?
No, that's too good. I was going to ask another question. That's too good.
That's a great place to end. Pleasure, is there anything we didn't ask that we should have asked, or anything you thought we would cover that we haven't covered?
You know, this was really fantastic, Patrick. I don't think there's anything, I mean, this is a rich, thoughtful group around this topic. So I think you all kind of met what I expected, right? You all are thoughtful. You're not entry level infancy to this work, right? You've been doing this, you're researching it. And so it's refreshing. I've enjoyed the dialogue tonight.
Well, thank you. It's been fantastic having you on, and we're not done. This is the part of every episode where, because we all believe if nothing happens, nothing happens. Nothing changes, nothing changes. So this is the let's get practical portion of the conversation. Based on what we've covered today, or things that we haven't covered but still would be good practical application for a CEO, for a frustrated CEO, or for a senior leader who's wanting to improve the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in her or his organization. What are some of the practical steps, the takeaways from our conversation today? Who would like to go first? I'm happy to go, but
Why don't you?
okay.
Love
I
her.
won't, look at that. I just
Either Love or I usually goes first, so it's
Okay.
yours. I'm
All
going
right.
to throw it to you.
Perfect. Okay. Pleasure. You talked about this in a few different spots, and I just thought it was really powerful. It was teach people how to treat you. So find the courage, find the ability to speak up without fear, to call out the behaviors, the words that are counter to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Let's work to educate others when we see the opportunity. You said it at the end, and I reiterated it. Stop saying that you don't know where to find diverse candidates. There are people out there who specialize in just that. So put your money where your mouth is. If you really truly want to get better at, if you want to improve your DEI, then hire someone who can help you find those folks. Let's see. Oh, and then I'll do this, and then we'll circle back. So third and last one. If you're struggling to make progress on DEI and belonging, or you just want to accelerate the process, strongly consider making it one of your core values, not just an addendum, something that you add, and oh, by the way. And then, to your point, and you made this point again a few times, Pleasure, tie those core values to your core competencies and ultimately to your dollars.
That's right.
Because dollars drive behavior. Money drives behavior. So those are three, I think, very practical steps a CEO can take. Hopefully that gave my colleagues a chance to sort through their notes and come up with their tops. What do you got?
I'll go.
Okay.
So one of them actually showed up from Pleasure as a recommendation, and I'm totally with it. It says, identify what space you are not evolved in, but I took it to you as a leader, as a person, and you as your culture.
Yeah.
So I think that's, vital. It's important. It's practical. It's something that people can do. Be a believer and not just a fan. Was another one. I love when you said that. I think I wrote down, ignore DEI at your own risk.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of companion to that, so I'll stop with this one. Don't let fear of being in the press, guide your own behavior.
That was a good one.
Yeah, it's there, it's real, but at the same time, if you need to take a stand and you get in the press for the right reason, that could work for you. So don't let fear guide you.
Wow.
Well, kind of no surprise that I have one that has about 5 different parts. So
Excellent.
It takes courage to evolve ourselves in our humanity, especially as leaders. And to do that, we have to challenge what we've learned and what no longer serves us. We have to know our values. We have to continue to question ourselves. And we have to be perpetual. I love that word, perpetual learners.
Yes.
And when we do all of those, we can welcome in more grace and love.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, Patrick warned me that you all would take all the good stuff. I'll just say that I love this type of learning. And I think what I appreciate and took away even from all of even the summaries are that we don't have this mastered. And this is not easy to solution. And so it's not a one size fits all, as I think I hear from our themes and conversations tonight. We shouldn't assume that this is just about race when we think about inclusivity and diversity and belonging, and then it really struck me when we talk about, conformity, and when Lev was talking about his experience in other cultures, I think we have to look at the diversity angle, and all of us have an obligation to change and educate and learn. And so just because I'm a woman doesn't mean that I stop learning about how to celebrate and include and care for. And I think sometimes in the conversation of diversity and inclusion, we do that. We'll say, well, I'm Black, I already got it down, Leb. I can't be more of anything. And that from tonight, I think it's just a reminder to me of I still have so much to learn about the topic, and I'm looking forward to learning more from you all and others.
Mm-hmm.
Good stuff.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Well, after that, I'm not going to ask anybody if they have anything to add because I feel like that's another mic drop moment. So that's good stuff. Pleasure. First of all, thank you so much for joining us today. This is as awesome as I just knew it was going to be.
Well, thank you for having me, Patrick and Leb and Patsy. It's been fantastic.
Absolutely.
Now, yes.
Let's go back to if anybody is interested in learning more about you. You are the president. I had it earlier. The chief executive consultant and owner of Allen Consulting. If anybody's curious, wants to get in touch with you, they have a question from this episode, or they just want to talk to you about either DEI and belonging or other things, right? You're an HR executive.
Yeah.
So what's the best way for people to contact you to get in touch with you?
So Patrick, obviously I'm out on LinkedIn. People can search my name and find me there, but also they can email me. My contact information is also out there. So I take all forms of contact, email, text message, phone calls, all of that works. I am very responsive. And of course, people do reach out on other social media platforms as well. But LinkedIn is probably the best way to contact me, and I'm happy to address things. Then, of course, my email at pmallen@allenconsulting.com, which I can share so we can have if needed.
Excellent. And so, listener, frustrated CEO, if you are looking for the easiest way to reach Pleasure on LinkedIn, go ahead out to LinkedIn and connect with us on the Frustrated CEO show page, because we'll be posting this snippets of this video, and every day we'll be making sure to tag Pleasure so you can just easily get in touch with her that way as well. And we'd love to engage with you there. So I think that's it. Anything else for the good of the cause?
Call you, Patrick. Just tell them to call you if they want to reach me. Just call Patrick.
Yes, I'll be your administrative assistant. That'll work.
No, you're my partner. We've got diversity work to do.
Excellent. That would be an honor. Okay. Leb, Patsy, thank you so much. Great job as always.
Thank you.
Yep. Pleasure. Thank you again. One final thank you. I know this is great content for the Frustrated CEO. Frustrated CEO, thank you so much for listening all the way to the end of another episode. As I mentioned, as Pleasure mentioned, you can really get in contact with all of us on LinkedIn. Please do help us shape future episodes. Let us know what's on your mind. And we will be sure to tackle those topics in future episodes. Don't forget to go to thefrustratedceo.com, which is where you can download this episode's Let's Get Practical as a handy guide as you listen through the episode. I think that's it. We will see you again next time on the Frustrated CEO podcast.